Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my dear brothers and sisters. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. All praise is indeed due to Allah, Lord of the worlds, Master of the universe. May His peace and blessings be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our guide, our teacher, the one who we love more than anything else in the world, and our exemplar. It looks like this is a series of different prophets that you've chosen and selected to learn about, and the prophet that has been given to me to share with you some of the stories of is Prophet SULEMAN alayhi salam. And SULEMAN is one of the great prophets mentioned in the Quran many times. And what we're going to go through is some of the stories, but we're going to look at one of the stories in particular. There are 4 big sections where he is mentioned. Surah Naml is the one we're going to look at, which is the story of SULEMAN alayhi salam and Bilqis, the queen of Sheba or Saba. Surah Sad is where he's mentioned again, Surah Anbiya, and Surah Saba itself. One very important lesson to learn when you look at the stories of the prophets, and it's a very important lesson, and I'll tell you why, because just some time ago I was listening to a CD set, a very famous CD set, on stories of the prophets. And when I started listening to one of the particular stories of Nuh alayhi salam, the story I heard, I thought, no, this can't be correct. And I went back and I checked where the story had come from. It was by a big sheikh, who was a very famous scholar, who was giving his rendition of the lives of the prophets. And it's a common problem, because when you look at the stories of the prophets, where people go to for the stories are the tarikhs by classical scholars. So Imam Tabari wrote his tarikh, history of the world as it were, and different scholars have written them, and so they took their sources from those books. But those books did not verify the accounts. So often what you read in stories of the prophets are actually not authentic stories. And I would say very often this is the case. This is part of the problem. So when it comes to researching this, for example, in my library I have various books on stories of the prophets. You have to be very careful where you get your stories from, because many of the accounts in the past were done by storytellers. Some of the old scholars of the past who wrote on subjects used to just collect stories from wherever they found them about a particular prophet, etc., collect them and put them in their book. What they didn't do is sieve them for authentication. And that requires a muhaddith to go through the stories and say, actually that's authentic and that's not authentic, etc. And what you're left with are a very small number of stories that are actually authentic. And we have to realize that had Allah intended for us to have more details, He would have provided it to us. And often what happened is, as Islam grew out of the Hijaz, out of Arabia, and we had so many Jews and Christians and Persians, etc., become Muslim, they took their stories, and over the decades they got added to the Islamic stories. So we had quite a bit of a mess, actually. And some of that mess carries through in some of the stories that you do hear. So be very careful when you come to looking at the stories of the lives of the prophets, and try and get it as authentic as possible from authentic hadith and from the Quran. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the story of SULEMAN alayhi salam. I'll tell you which bits are authentic and which bits are embellishments. And you have in your selection here a very famous Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Brilliant is the abridged version of it. And even Ibn Kathir is not, although he is more reliable than others, but there are stories in here which are not authentic as well. So you just have to be very, very careful when you read stories. You just make sure that you can corroborate and go back. Right, let's move on. There are 6 stories of Sulaiman al-Islam, 6 aspects of his life that are mentioned in the Quran specifically. One is a description about what gifts and powers and favors Allah has bestowed upon him. The second is a story which we find also in Hadith about his supreme wisdom, which we'll talk about later. The third is a story which actually was recited at the beginning, but the translation, there's a slight actually difference of opinion on the translation, and the translation you read out wasn't the most accurate one on this. Is a story of the illness of Sulaiman al-Islam and him praising God. The fourth is the famous story, the biggest story, and the most detailed story we have in the Quran, is the story of Sulaiman and the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of Saba. And included in that comes the fifth story, which is the story of the ant and the army, and we'll come on to that. And lastly is an account of his death. So these are the stories from the Quranic side. The Hadith don't add much to it. From the authentic Hadith, we don't have much on it. So I'll stick to mainly that. Now, when we look at the bounties that were given to Sulaiman al-Islam, he is special among all the prophets, really, in one sense. You look at the supreme gifts that he was given. The first is he was given prophethood. He was the son of Dawood al-Islam, David, King David, the person to whom was revealed the Psalms as Zabur. And the Psalms make a big portion of the Bible, the Torah. You find most services, church services, will always have some aspect of a part of a psalm in them, in the churches. And Sulaiman al-Islam was gifted to Dawood al-Islam by Allah, and he was the prophet. He was the prophet who came after. The second gift he was given the gift of kingship. Sulaiman the Magnificent, Sulaiman the Great. And so, if you look at what's happening currently in Jerusalem, you'll see that the Masjid al-Aqsa and the whole tunnels that are being built underneath by the Israeli archaeologists in their keenness to find the heritage of Sulaiman al-Islam, because that's where his empire was. Jerusalem was the head, the capital of his empire. His magnificent temple and palace stood in that spot. His third gift was a massive army, the likes of which had never been seen before. And Allah gifted that to him. And his fourth gift, and this is what he asked for, the Bible has a strange parallel, and I'll go into a bit about how the Bible differs from the Quran and the story of Sulaiman al-Islam. The Bible has a strange parable that when God asked Solomon, what do you wish for? What do you ask me for? He asked for wisdom and knowledge. And so wisdom and knowledge comes as a big, big favor from Allah. And we have the same story but slightly different. The fifth, because of the knock-on effect of that wisdom and knowledge, is his judgments. He was the supreme judge. If you wish for anything, you should wish for the wisdom of Sulaiman al-Islam. The way he was able to judge between people. And I've got two stories for you. One is the Quranic story, and one is a biblical story. And both are very famous. The next he was given is wealth. And he asked in the dua that he made, he asked for everything. And everything here Ibn Kathir describes as everything to do with kingship. And now comes the special 3 powers he was given, the last 3. And he was given those, you do not find them with any other prophet apart from the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the language of the birds, animals and insects. Sulaiman alayhi salam could understand and converse with birds, animals and insects. The next thing, he had the power over jinn. Allah gave him the power to entrap jinn, control jinn. Jinn were afraid of Sulaiman alayhi salam and his power. And the last thing he was given was the power to control the wind. Rih. So he was given the power to control the wind. So it's magnificent. If you look at the list of what he has been given, I mean, there's no one like it. If you think about it, the way he's been given it, the way he's been, the favors he's been given. So let's start with the first, one of the most famous, actually, one of the most famous ones is the wisdom of Sulaiman Islam. And we have in Surah Anbiya, it's related. And remember Dawood and Sulaiman, how it was when both of them gave judgment concerning the field into which some people's sheep had strayed at night and pastured therein, and how we bore witness to their judgment. This ayah, and it's only just one ayah describing that particular story. We find the rest of the story in the hadith books, in Bayhaqi. This is a case that came to Dawood al-Islam. Dawood al-Islam was the king. Next to him sitting is Sulaiman al-Islam. The case came that there was a person who had a pasture. In one account it's a vineyard. So he grew grapes, and another it's crops. Next to him is another field with someone who owns sheep. So a shepherd and someone who owns crops. 2 farmers, if you like. The sheep one day went through a gap in the fence that the shepherd had not managed to look after, went into the vineyard, the grape trees of the grapevines of the other shepherd, and ate his crop. So poor man, he's left with nothing. All his crop is gone. So he starts arguing with the shepherd, and this case has now been brought to Dawood al-Islam. And in this case, they're arguing. Dawood al-Islam listens to the discussion, listens to this. The shepherd is a poor man. He can't pay for the damage that his sheep have done to the other field. So what is the judgment here? So Bayhaqi narrates from Ibn Masud, Dawood al-Islam, when he gave the judgment, Dawood gave the judgment that the sheep be given to the owner of the crops. So he said, well, actually, Dawood al-Islam is saying he's lost his grapes, he's lost his crop. The fault is with the shepherd. So he said, right, you can't pay him, give him your sheep. Let him take his sheep. Now from the surface of it, this sounds wise. It sounds, if he can't pay for it, he can't earn anything else, he doesn't have anything, so let him give him the sheep. Sulaiman alayhi salam spoke up and he said, another judgment, if I may, O Prophet of Allah. So he's speaking to his father, can I give another opinion, if I may? Dawood al-Islam said, what is your judgment? Sulaiman said, and this shows the wisdom now. Sulaiman alayhi salam said, give the man who's lost the crop his sheep temporarily, and give the shepherd the crops, the field with the crops, the grapevines, and ask the shepherd to look after and nurture and cultivate the field of the crops, the grapes, until the grapes are back to the condition they were in before the sheep took them. And all the while he's nurturing and looking after that crop, the grape owner takes the sheep and benefits from the wool and the milk, etc. And once the grapes are of the quality they were before, swap them back. And this way, neither lose their risk, if you like. Because the shepherd, all he had was the sheep. So subhanAllah, it's such a beautiful wisdom. Very clever, very wise. And this shows, and the Bayhaqi finishes, this is what is meant by the verse, we made Suleiman to understand. Because the verse that comes immediately after, we made Suleiman understand the case, though we gave sound judgment and knowledge to both. So Allah Himself is saying, actually Suleiman's verdict was better, even though both were wise. So that shows the wisdom of Suleiman alayhi salam. Now it reminds me of, there's a nice Arab books you can get, a bit like funny. They're like jokes, but they've got good moral stories, and they're called, and you must have come across them, they're called Hodja's Tales. Hodja was a judge, used to live in Turkey, and I don't know how far we can trace him, whether he actually existed or not. I've never researched it. But I'm reminded of a judgment once, which is in one of the books, again shows wisdom, is that a man, a poor beggar, he had nothing but a piece of dried roti. That's all he's got. He's hungry. So he, looking around, there's no salan, no curry. So he sees this restaurant, open air restaurant. And there's a pot of salan being cooked. And he sees the smoke rising up. And next to the pot is stairs going up on the outside. So he thinks of an idea. He climbs up the steps, goes to the top, holds his roti out in the smoke until the sun, the smell of the curry goes on to, and then he starts eating it. Because at least it's imbued with the smell. The restaurant owner, must have been a greedy man, grabs hold of him and he said, right, pay me for that. He said, well, I haven't taken any curry. No, you got to pay me for the smell. You took the smell on the roti. So he said, I haven't got anything. So he took him to the judge, and Hodja was the judge. And Hodja listened to the case, and he said to the beggar, he says, have you got any money? He goes, no, I don't. He said, here, take my change. So he takes this change, he said, put it in your pocket. He said, put it in the pocket. He said, now shake it. So he shakes it. And then he turns to the restaurant owner. He said, for the smell of your curry is the payment of the sound of his money. That's a very nice, wise way of solving the situation. Anyway, so wisdom of Suleiman Islam. Now, I want to take us to a story which is in the Bible. And before I do that, I just want to go through how we as Muslims treat the Bible. What is our view of the stories that are in the Bible? And I'll tell you how, we respect the Bible in a big way. And I can tell you that one of the few times that I was actually hit by my mother was I won the Calderdale Bible competition, alhamdulillah, many years ago. I was about 10 years old, and I was the first Muslim in 150 years to win this Bible competition. And I was given a leather Bible. So I took it home, proud, put it on the coffee table, sitting there, having my tea, and my mum comes in and she goes, what's this? I said, I came first, it's a Bible. Because it's a Bible. And she hit me. She said, put it on the shelf, not here where your feet are. And so this is, we respect this book because it is a book that contains the stories of so many of our Anbiya, the prophets, etc. But how do we see it from a hukum perspective, from a Sharia perspective? It's a very important point. There are three ways of looking at it, and scholars have gone into three different outlooks on it. The first have said it's not true at all. It contains nothing that is true, except those stories which we find in the Quran and authentic hadith. Everything else extra is not correct, is not true. The second opinion, and some scholars have gone down that first opinion, the second opinion are those scholars who said everything in it is true except that which contradicts the Quran and the authentic hadith. So they've gone the other way. The default position is it's true unless it contradicts. And it's the second opinion that has led to quite a bit of a problem for us, because some of the accounts that you find in books of the prophets, in Muslim books, come from the Bible. They don't come from Quran and Hadith. They come from the Bible. They've seeped into Islamic tradition. We call it Israeliyat, because that's how they've come in. The third opinion, which I favor, I follow the third opinion, which says that we cannot tell whether the stories in the Bible are correct or not correct, because we have nothing to judge it on, except that which is in the Quran we know is correct, and that which is in the Hadith we know is correct, and that which contradicts the Quran and the Hadith we know is not correct. The rest, Allah knows best. So we leave it like Allah knows best, and I think that's how we take it. Now I'll just mention to you the story how Solomon in the Bible, in the anglicized version of the Bible actually, because in the Aramaic form is Suleiman. But Solomon in the Bible, there is no mention of jinn. There is no mention of Suleiman alayhi salam having the language of animals or birds, etc. There's no mention of that. And the story of Bilqis is there, but it's actually slightly different. And here's the wisdom story that is in the Bible. Again, it's a very beautiful story. You'll find it in the Israeliyat among our sources, but it's not in our authentic sources. It's two women came to Suleiman alayhi salam. Two mothers. They used to live in the same house, in beds which were side by side. By coincidence, both women gave birth to babies in a relatively same amount of time, a couple of days between. So they had two babies in the house, and they used to sleep, one on her bed with her baby, the other one in her bed with her baby. One day, one of them, as she rolled over her baby, and a little while later woke up and found that her baby was dead. She's quite upset, but she keeps quiet. She looks over and she sees the other mother is asleep with the baby asleep. They looked identical. Babies are babies, very early. They're dressed virtually the same. So she takes her baby, puts it there, and takes the living baby and puts it next to her and goes to sleep. In the morning, the other woman mother wakes up and finds the baby dead. So she picks it up, tries to wake it up, and she looks closer and she says, "It's not my baby." So she accuses the other one, "You've taken my baby." She goes, "No, this is my baby." So this case argument goes to the court, and Suleiman alayhi salam is there. So he receives these two women, all arguing over, the baby is mine, no, the baby is mine. Yeah? So what does Suleiman alayhi salam do? He hears the case, and he says, right, so let me get this right. You're saying the baby is yours, and you're saying the baby is yours. Yes. Okay. Since there are two claimants over one baby, give me the baby. So he gives the baby to him. He asks the guard, he said, bring me your sword. I'll halve the baby, you can take two halves, one half each. Immediately one of the women starts screaming. She goes, no, please, let her have it, at least it's alive, please don't do this to my son. And he says, that's her baby. And off he goes. So it's a really clever way of seeing whose emotion, motherly instinct, would be sparked when they found that their child would be in danger of being killed. And that way, that's how he solved that particular. And that's in the Bible, in Kings. Now, before I finish off with the Bible and then go back to the Quran and the Hadith, I just want to mention again, very importantly, that there is one aspect in the Bible on Sulaiman alayhi salam's story which we totally reject. And it is, we do not accept it at all. And it is this, and it's again, you'll find it in 1 Kings 11. Solomon loved his wife, the daughter of the king of Egypt, but he also loved some women from Moab, Ammon and Edom, etc. He married 300 other women. As Solomon got older, some of his wives led him to the worship of other gods. He wasn't like his father David, who had worshipped only one God. Solomon also worshipped the god Astarte, the goddess of Sidon, and Milcom, the disgusting god of Ammon, etc. We reject this. So this is one of the things that we can give an example of where we say this is an invention against the character of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Sulaiman, the true, this does not befit his character. Okay, now let's move on to the most famous story. This is a story, you'll find it in Surah Naml, Surah 27, and it's between verses 15 and 44. That's where the story is. And the way we're going to do this, if it's all right with you, we will go through it verse by verse. Is that okay? So if we begin that. So Surah Naml. I'll get the other Quran 1 minute, please. Okay. Yeah, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وورث سليمان داود وقال يا أيها الناس علمنا منطق الطير وأوتينا من كل شيء إن هذا لهو الفضل المبين.
And indeed we gave knowledge to Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam. And they both said, all praise be to Allah who has preferred us above many of his believing servants.
وحشر لسليمان جنوده من الجن والإنس والطير فهم يوزعون حتى إذا أتوا على واد النمل قالت نملة يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم لا يحطمنكم سليمان وجنوده وهم لا يشعرون.
And Suleiman inherited from Dawood, so meaning that Suleiman came after Dawood al-Islam. And of course we understand that prophets don't inherit. The hadith in Sahih Muslim says that the prophets do not inherit. Whatever the prophets have is given away in charity. So this is talking about inheriting prophethood. So Suleiman inherited from Dawood al-Islam. He said, "O mankind, we have been taught the language of birds, and we have been given from everything." So Suleiman al-Islam is saying what he's been given. And then immediately after telling us what he's been given, he says, "This verily is an evident grace." It's a bounty from Allah, it's a favor. Okay?
فتبسم ضاحكا من قولها وقال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأدخلني برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين.
And there were gathered before Suleiman his hosts of jinn, men and birds, and they were all set in battle order, marching forward. So this is the army of Suleiman al-Islam. You can imagine it. It's got birds, jinn, and people, and all hosts of animals. So this is the army of Suleiman al-Islam, and they're all in battle order. So you can imagine regimented order. And in some Mufassirs have mentioned that each squadron had its own leader, etc., to marshal the animals and so on. Allah knows best, but the Quran's mentioning how they were regimented like in battle order. Yeah?
وتفقد الطير فقال ما لي لا أرى الهدهد أم كان من الغائبين لأعذبنه عذابا شديدا أو لأذبحنه أو ليأتيني بسلطان مبين.
Until when they came to the valley of the ants, one of the ants said, "O ants, hurry into your dwellings, into your houses, lest Suleiman and his armies crush you while they perceive it not." So one of the ants is saying, "Oh my God, this army is coming towards us, quickly, quickly get in so that you're safe from the trampling of Suleiman's army." Now here this is again interesting, because some, which I believe is actually not correct, but some of the modern tafsir writers, and if you look at Muhammad Asad, for example, Muhammad Asad, a brilliant translator of the Quran, but one of his deficiencies, unfortunately, one of his issues that I have with him and many people have with him, is he doesn't believe in the concept of jinn. And so he tries to move away from some of the, if you like, miraculousness of this. And in this one as well, some of the modern Mufassirs write that this can't be the ant. Suleiman didn't know the language of the ants, so they say it's the tribe called Andaman, which actually does not fit. It does not fit with the Quranic, the use of its words. So the best meaning is exactly as it says. An ant called out, "Hurry back into your houses, into your ants' houses, because the army is coming and it'll crush us." Yeah.
فمكث غير بعيد فقال أحطت بما لم تحط به وجئتك من سبأ بنبأ يقين إني وجدت امرأة تملكهم وأوتيت من كل شيء ولها عرش عظيم وجدتها وقومها يسجدون للشمس من دون الله وزين لهم الشيطان أعمالهم فصدهم عن السبيل فهم لا يهتدون.
So he, Suleiman, smiled, amused at her speech, at the ant, because he understood, he heard. And that shows you his power. Where is the ant? It must be far away, because the army hasn't reached it yet. To hear an ant, I mean, you'd have to hold, if you could understand the language of an ant, you'd probably have to hold it here. But he could hear in a distance, and he could hear and understand it. So Suleiman al-Islam is amused, smiled and as amused at this, and it causes him, and Ibn Kathir quite nicely writes that it causes him to reflect on the bounties of Allah. So he says, "My Lord, grant me the power and ability that I may be grateful for your favors which you have bestowed on me and on my parents, and that I may do righteousness, righteous good deeds that will please you and admit me by your mercy among your righteous servants." And the Arabic word is salih. So he's saying, "Ya Allah, make me do deeds which are pious, salih." So it's a very, very big lesson for us, what sort of things to ask for. And one of the points I'm going to mention later on. I think because of time, what I'll do is I'll just read it in English, I think, probably. How long have we got?
20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. So thank you very much for that, I think. Is that right? So we have that up to there. And he took a muster of the birds, and he said, "Why is it that I see not the hoopoe bird, the hudhud? Or is he among the ones who is absent?" So what's that mean? Suleiman looked at his army. He did a roll call. You know, when you're about to march off to the army, you do a registration, if you like. You do a quick count, make sure everybody's there who's supposed to be there. And what's amazing again, and shows his power, is you can imagine the vastness of his army, and he notices one bird is missing. The hudhud, or the hoopoe bird. And the hoopoe is actually, that's the hoopoe, if you can see it. Yeah, it's a colourful bird with a colourful plumage. And this bird, according to some of the tafsirs, was a scout for Suleiman al-Islam. And it would scout out water beneath the ground for Suleiman al-Islam. So you notice it's missing, and he's quite angry. Why is it missing? It had better have a good excuse. Then the ayah continues, "I will certainly punish him with a severe punishment or execute him unless he brings me a clear excuse." But the hoopoe tarried not far, and he came up and he said, "I have seen that which you have not seen, and I have come to you from Sabah with true knowledge." So he's saying to Suleiman al-Islam, he's actually attracting him by saying, "I know something you don't know." And I've come from far away from Sabah. Sabah was an area in Yemen, we think, most likely. So he's come from that far, that distance. "I found there a woman ruling over her people and provided with every wealth, and she has a magnificent throne." And Maulana Maududi used this verse very famously to argue one of his cases during the elections in Pakistan when Jinnah's daughter, wasn't it, I think? Sister stood for elections. Maulana Maududi argued that there was actually, you could elect a woman as a leader, and he used one of his evidences was this particular ayahs of the Quran. "I found there a woman ruling over them and provided with every wealth." So that's what the bird is telling Suleiman. "I found her and her people worshipping the sun besides Allah. Shaitan has made their deeds seem pleasing to them, and has kept them away from the path. They receive no guidance. So they worship not Allah, who brings forth what is hidden in the heavens and the earth, and knows what you hide and what you reveal. Allah, there is no God but He, Lord of the throne, supreme. So birds saying they're sun worshippers. And according to one of the tafsirs, again, I found no authentic record, so Allah knows best, maybe it is there somewhere. But some of the tafsirs described her palace, that her palace was situated in a particular position so that in every single sun's movement, light would shine through some of the windows to reflect her worship of the sun. So she's a powerful lady, great wealth, big kingdom, and a massive, ornate, glorious throne. But of course, nothing in comparison to Suleiman. So Suleiman's heard this. Suleiman then, alayhi salam, says, soon shall we see whether you have told the truth or have lied. Go you to the cuckoo bird. Go you with this letter of mine and throw it to her or deliver it to her, and then draw back and see what answer they give. So the cuckoo bird carries the letter to the Saba and throws it at her feet in her chamber. The queen opens the letter, she sees the letter from Suleiman alayhi salam, and she says, and she calls her chiefs, her council, her shura. She said, the queen said, you chiefs, here is delivered to me a letter worthy of respect. It is from Suleiman, and it says as follows. And here, if you know, every surah of the Quran begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, except one, Surah Tawbah. And so there are altogether 114 surahs of the Quran, but there are actually 114 Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Bismillahs in the Quran.
Yeah.
And this is the extra one. It's actually at the beginning of Suleiman alayhi salam's letter. It begins Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is from Suleiman, in the name of Allah, most merciful, most compassionate. Do not be arrogant against me, but come to me surrendering to God. That's it. So you can imagine what she's thinking. One, she's seen a bird throw a letter. That's not how you normally get a delivery, is it? Right? She's astounded. Who, what, how, who is this? Who? And she reads it, it carries the name of Allah, and then just says, come to me. So she must have heard, because she knows where to go. She must have heard of Suleiman, but that's all she knows. She said, you chiefs, advise me in this matter. No affair have I decided except in your presence. And some scholars use this as an evidence, although others didn't agree, about the concept of shura. But of course, remember, she is not Muslim, but some said, no, the idea is about wisdom in governance. They said, the chiefs, we're endued with strength, we've got great strength, and we make good war. But the command is yours, O Queen, so consider what you wish to consider. So they're saying to her, you decide. She said, O kings. She said, kings, when they enter a country, they lay it waste, and they humble its people. So she's saying, basically, she doesn't know what to do. He must be very strong, very powerful. If she upsets him, he'll wipe her out. He'll wipe their kingdom out. So what does she do? She thinks what to do. And of course, a clever ploy, you win your enemies over by gifts. So she thinks, I'll send him a gift. So she chooses a gift. And you can imagine, knowing what she knows about this Suleiman alayhi salam, she chooses the most expensive, ornate gift she can. And then she sends it to him. But I'm going to send him a present. And wait, I'll see what my messengers bring back. So who's going to take the gift? These 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 people, whoever she's chosen. What does she mean, what they bring back? In other words, they're going to go over there, give the gift, but what else are they going to do? They're going to check him out. What's his army like? What's his situation? What's his arm? What's the scenario? So these are like spies going into enemy territory, as it were, scouting out. So when the embassy came to Sulaiman alayhi salam, he said, "What is this? Will you give me wealth?" He's not interested in wealth. "But that which Allah has given me is better than this. Nay, it is you who rejoice in your gifts." Again, a very powerful lesson for us. It's you people who get bribed by gifts, not us people. We don't get bribed. And that tells you the characteristic of a Muslim. A Muslim does not get bribed, despite what you see in all the Muslim countries. Right? It does not get bribed. It's not in our character. It's not supposed to be in the strong moral rectitude. We do not have a price. Yeah? So, nay, it is you who rejoice in your gifts. Go back and be sure we shall come to them with such an army as they will never be able to meet. We shall expel them from there in disgrace, and they will feel humbled. Now you can imagine what these messengers are thinking. They've gone in there to give a gift. They've probably seen more in the palace of Sulaiman as they've gone in there than the gift. They probably feel embarrassed giving such a gift by now. And then they also see his army. You don't see birds in an army. You don't see animals in an army. You don't see jinn in an army. So they realize now this man means business. So they go back now. And Sulaiman says to his own men, "You chiefs, which of you," so they've gone back, "which of you can bring me her throne before she comes in submission?" So an Ifrit is a powerful jinn. And Ifrit said, "I will bring it to you before you rise up from your seat. Indeed, I have full strength for the purpose and may be trusted." But before he could do that, one who had knowledge of the book spoke and said, "I will bring it to you before your eye blinks." And he did. And many accounts, and you can go through all, and there's nothing more than that, I'm afraid. But many Sufi books have been written about who this is who had knowledge of the book. Because that's all it says. Was it jinn? Was it not jinn? And so on. So, but I'll leave that to your wonderful readings, because there isn't really anything else more than that. One who had knowledge of the book. Some said another powerful jinn. Others said no, somebody with ultra knowledge. Somebody said it's one who had knowledge of Allah's names. So Allah knows best. And certainly within a blinking of an eye, there it was. "By the grace of my Lord, to test me whether I am grateful or not." Then when Sulaiman saw it, he saw the throne of Bilqis placed firmly before him. He said, "This is by the grace of my Lord to test me whether I am grateful or ungrateful. Truly his gratitude is a gain for his own soul. But if any is ungrateful, truly my Lord is free of all need, supreme in honor." He then said, "Disguise her throne. Let us see whether she is guided to the truth." So they disguised her throne. Another way of looking at it, maybe they refurbished it, made it look totally new or different. When she arrived, and she arrived now, and you can imagine how she arrives, because she knows. And why does she come? Normally, kings don't come to each other, they send emissaries. But she arrives because she knows now, her messengers have told her the power of Sulaiman alayhi salam. She knows she's got no chance. So she comes. She was asked, when she arrived, she was asked, "Is this your throne?" She said, "It seems the same." So she recognizes it. And now what's she thinking?
How did it come here?
I left it there. It's massive. We hurried here. How did this get here? And how did it get changed? So all what she's seen, a bird delivering a letter, her messengers coming back to her, telling them the strength of Sulaiman's army, his palace, and then seeing the throne here, that's it. You know, the game is over. And knowledge was bestowed on us in advance of this, and we have submitted to Allah. And He diverted her from the worship of others besides Allah, for she was sprung of a people that had no faith. She was then asked to enter Sulaiman's palace. And when she saw it, she thought it was a lake. because she could see, some say reflection, some say the water beneath. She thought it was a lake of water, so she tucked up her dress, uncovered her legs, her shins, and Suleiman spoke and said, "This is a palace paved with smooth slabs of glass." And then that's it. The pennies drop, she crumbles. She said, "Oh my Lord, I have indeed wronged my soul. I do now submit with Suleiman in Islam to the Lord of the worlds." Okay, so that's the story of Bilqis alayhi salam. And it's the story of the power of Suleiman and what he was given. I just want to finish in the last sort of 10-15 minutes, yeah? 10 minutes?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. I just want to mention some of the lessons that we can learn from his life. There is one other bit that I didn't mention, which is the death of Suleiman alayhi salam. Again, much has been written about it. There's only one ayah regarding it. And this ayah just basically says, and it's in Surah Sabah, Surah 34, verse 14, "Then when we decreed Suleiman's death, nothing showed them his death, except a little worm of the earth, which kept gnawing away at his staff. So when he fell down, the jinn so plainly that had they known the unseen, they would not have been in this humiliating position." In other words, Mufassirs now written around it, tafsir writers, they say that Suleiman alayhi salam was in prayer with his stick. While in prayer, he died. Allah took his soul away. But he remained there because the stick held him up. The jinn carried on doing what they were doing because they still thought he's alive and he's going to whack us if we don't, he's powerful. So they carried on until gradually woodworm or worms, whatever, gnawed away at the stick, and the stick broke and he fell, and they realized he'd been dead for a while. So that's how Mufassirs have understood. So those are the only stories in the Quran regarding Suleiman alayhi salam. Let's look at the lessons, a few very important lessons that come, because no story is there without lessons. The first is, doesn't matter what Allah has given you, is to be completely and continuously grateful to Him. And that's what we see. Straight from the first moment, the first gift of Suleiman is mentioned, it is said, all praise, he says, all praise is due to God who has favored us above many of His believing slaves. Again, same thing, we have been taught the speech of the birds. This indeed is a manifest favor from Allah. So he's not saying, look what I've got. He's always saying, look what Allah has blessed me with. That's the first lesson. Doesn't matter what Allah gives us, to be eternally grateful always for whatever bounty He gives. The second is, when we began, we opened it with Surah Sad, where Suleiman alayhi salam shows his love of horses, fine horses. And in Surah Sad, at the end, he says, my love of fine things, Suleiman is saying, alayhi salam, my love of fine things, of beautiful things, is part of my remembering my Lord. So here we come to a concept in Islam called Tahdith al-Ni'mah, is actually wearing nice things to show the bounty that Allah has given you. Not wearing nice things to show off. It's a totally different niyyah. Allah has blessed me with something, I'd like to show the world that look what Allah has blessed me with. Not, I'd like to look down upon people. It's a totally different mindset. And this is what Suleiman, he was magnificent. That's why he's magnificent. His throne, his palace, his everything. But he loved God. These things meant nothing to him because he was always grateful to them. So he showed the world what he had. The third lesson is not being arrogant because of what's been given. And he never said, look what I did, look what I have, look how I made myself, I had nothing and then I worked myself up and all this. No, Allah gave you the health to do it with. Allah gave you the bounty, the opportunities, etc. You see, you ask any successful businessman, What made is luck. They call it luck. We call it qadr. Because it's the will of God, how things meet together. Lesson 4 is the story of how he became ill, and that's what you translated actually. In that translation, the actual translation, وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ سُلَيْمَانَ وَالْقَيْنَا عَلَى كُرْسِيهِ جَسَدٍ. Jasad is the word here. Jasad means a dead body or a body. We certainly tested Suleiman, and I prefer Abdul Halim's translation here, who's Professor Abdul Halim from SOAS. His translation, I think, does it quite well. We certainly tested Suleiman alayhi salam, reducing him to a mere skeleton on his throne. And there's nothing else mentioned about this. It's the commentators who now bring us up to speed. They say he was ill, very ill, until he was emaciated. And still, despite that, the ayah says he prayed. So this is the lesson number 4. Calling on Allah doesn't matter what happens. Many of our families in Pakistan now, in Kashmir, etc., with the floods going on, doesn't matter what trauma we have, doesn't matter what happens, is always to call on Him, never despair from calling on Him. Yarhamkullah. He prayed, Qala Rabbi ghfirli, oh my Lord, forgive my sins. You know, when you come up from sujood, you say, Rabbi ghfirli, my Lord, forgive me. Yeah, and one of the things that we learned, the du'as that you say between the sujood. My Lord, forgive me is Suleiman's dua. My Lord, forgive me and bestow upon me the gift of a kingdom which may not suit anyone else after me. Verily, you alone are the giver of gifts. So lesson 4, calling on Allah doesn't matter what test there is. Lesson 5, asking to do the right thing. So difficult. The test of a person, if I could test people, the test is give you an opportunity to gain some money, some wealth, some power. No one will know. You will not be arrested. It's illegal. Will you do it? Or will you not? And he asked for that dua. He said, Ya Allah, give me, inspire me, so that I may always do what is right, what is salih. Always do what is right. Very difficult thing to do when no one's watching. So again, that's the and this whole surah is named after the ant, because it's the ant that inspired him to say that. Lesson 6, which has been mentioned before, he realized the hupu was missing. It's an eye for detail. It's always, whenever you do any program, anything, eye for detail, making sure that everything's right, etc. Lesson 7 is a side issue, I thought, actually. The hupu was missing. So what was the mistake of the hupu, the hudhud? What was his mistake is a lesson. Not being absent without the Amir's knowledge. You're responsible. The hupu is part of the army. You do not leave without telling and informing the commander, the Amir. This is a point of principle. And lastly is what Suleiman alayhi salam did. He began everything with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We don't have this before. He did it. It's in the letter. He started with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And we follow, if you like, that's his sunnah that we follow. So that's his lesson, and we just finish with a beautiful, the last thing about that Allah writes, and Allah sums up Suleiman alayhi salam in one sentence. Yeah? وَوَهَبْنَا لِدَاوُودَ سُلَيْمَانَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. And unto David we granted Suleiman, how excellent, behold, he would always turn to us. So that's the message of Suleiman Islam. Someone who was given the wealth of the nation, of the world, someone who went through trials, but despite it all, always turned to God and thanked Him. May Allah constantly help us to live by the lessons that we derive from him and from all the Anbiya. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.